Hi everyone, this is Will from Fracture Sounds, and I'm really excited today to show you our latest library, Box Factory. Box Factory is a cinematic percussion library, but the twist is that everything you hear in this library is made from cardboard boxes. And I know that sounds like a crazy idea, but trust me, it sounds really cool. We got together a huge ensemble of about 40 boxes of all different shapes and sizes, and we sampled them in different configurations using different performance techniques. So let's dive in and start playing with some of the sounds. So we'll start by just loading in the first patch, which is the main instruments and the natural mix. So we've actually got 4 separate mixes in this library, and these are just taking the source recordings and processing them in different ways, so you get a really diverse range of sounds. So I'm going to start with the natural mix. So you'll see there we've got a range of different articulations and ensembles mapped from low to high on the keyboard. I'll show you each individual articulation in a minute, but first I just want to dive into these main controls on the interface here. So let's start with the mic mix. As with some of our other libraries, we've got the perspective control, which is just a way of really easily dialing in the mix from close to far, so it will just smoothly transition between those 3 mics. So if we go to the close mics only, so that's the close mic. Let's then solo the mid mic. And then if we go to the far mics, so then let's move on to the Sculpt controls here. So these are basically just 4 easy controls to shape the sound in various ways. So on the left here, we've got the punch control, and this is basically shaping the envelope of each hit, adding in some extra attack. So if we bring that up, so compare it with and without. Just gives it a lot more focus and it brings it up front a bit more. And then next along we have the Decay Trim, which is a way to sort of reduce the amount of room ambience. So if you don't want so much of that big reverb from the far mics, you can just tame that down a bit. So let's see how this sounds. And then when you combine this with different mic setups, you can really get a diverse range of sounds. So in fact, you can just use the far mics on their own, and you get that huge wide sound of the far mics, but you don't get that big reverb building up. And if you combine this with the punch as well. So you've got a lot of control over how the boxes sound in the room using these controls. And then next along we have the Saturate control, which is just harmonic saturation that's applied to each individual hit. If we turn this up, you'll see how that adds a lot of grit to the sounds. Especially the low hits, it really adds a lot of aggression to the low frequencies. Let's bring in some close mic. And next along we have the squash control, which is a compressor that's applied to the whole signal. And this just controls the dynamics a bit, adds a bit of a glue effect. To compare with and without. And we've dialed in all the settings for you already, so there's quite a lot going on under the hood, but we've presented it as a single knob so you can just really easily choose how little or how much compression you want. The real power comes in when you combine these controls. So you'll notice when we add a lot of saturation and compression, we sort of lose some of that punchiness because the compression and saturation is just making those transients get lost. But of course we can add those back using the punch control. And then likewise with the Decay Trim, the saturation and squash are really bringing out that room reverb, but we can just dial that down a little bit using the Decay Trim. And that sounds so different, doesn't it? We can really transform the sound using these controls and just dial in exactly the sound you want. So it doesn't sound like a raw natural mix anymore. We've completely transformed it. Now let's move on to the ensemble stack. So of course the samples themselves are recorded as ensembles, but if you want to increase the size of the ensemble, you can layer these samples together. So if you increase the size knob here, you're actually stacking round robins on top of each other to create just the sense of a bigger ensemble. So that's the normal ensemble, and then so already that's really increased the size of the sound. But then if we add some of this looseness, and the looseness is basically the amount of time between each stacked sample. So it just gives the impression of each player just playing a little bit out of time with each other. So obviously when you turn it all the way up, it can sound a little bit sloppy. But if you dial it down to about halfway, this is sort of a sweet spot for me. And then next along we have the spread. And this is doing two things. Firstly, it's spreading out the panning of each stacked layer to give a wider stereo image. And it's also slightly detuning each stacked sample, which gives it a sort of bigger chorusy sound. So it's subtle, but it does add that extra weight to the ensemble. So the next along we have the stereo width and the reverb. So with the stereo width, you can narrow the stereo image or widen it. So bring it all the way down to completely mono if you want. And then you can widen it even further. And then next along we've got the reverb. So if you want even more room sound than the far mics offer, you can just turn the reverb up. You've also got different types of reverb. You've got room and hall, and then these various settings here. If you do want to use your own external reverb, that's completely fine. Just turn this all the way down and it'll bypass the effect. And then let's go to the setup page. Now, I'm going to do a separate video for the setup page because it can get quite in depth. Basically, you can recustomize all of this. You can change the mapping, you can load articulations and remove articulations, edit the articulations with various settings. You don't have to do any of this. This is just a completely optional thing for people who want to dive a bit deeper. But I'll do a separate video on that. Don't worry about it. If you just want to load the instrument and play it, that's completely fine. But what I will show you is the different individual articulations we've got. So first at the bottom, we've got the huge box mallets, and we've sampled them in loads of detail. So you've got the full dynamic range, loads of round robins. And then moving up, we've got the hand hits on the same boxes. These have a more sort of tactile slap sound to them. And then you'll see further down, we've got the same articulations again. And these are actually using these articulation settings, and they're the same sounds, but they're filtered. So you get a more boomy sound on the bottom C. So we've got the low pass filter. It's also tuned down a little bit. And then moving up, we've got the large boxes, which are still pretty large, but not as large as the huge boxes. That's what these sound like. Again, these are the hand hits. and then stick hits. And then moving up again, we've got the medium boxes. And again, we've got hands and sticks. And then moving up, we've got small boxes. And with the small boxes, the stick articulations are more of a rim shot sound. We really hit the edge of the box to give you that, that clacky sound. And then moving up, we've got the tiny boxes. Now these are really tiny boxes that we just sort of clapped in our hands. So next we've got the brush hits, starting with the large box brushes. And then the medium box brushes. And then next up we've got, this is actually another instance of the medium boxes brushes, but with a high pass filter added. So it's just a different sound, but using the same samples. And then onto the small box brushes. We've got a few of those as well. And then finally, we've got the stick clicks. So those are the main articulations that we've offered. Further down, we've got dynamic range control, which is basically how much the velocity affects the volume. So if you turn this all the way down, you still get the full range of velocity samples, but they're all playing at the same volume. And then when you turn it all the way up, you get a lot of dynamic response. So really the softest velocities are silent almost. So you can dial this into your taste. I quite like it about the 80% mark. And then next along, we've got the sample start, which is how far into the sample it starts playing. So if you dial it back, you get a little bit more latency. So it doesn't feel quite as responsive to play, but you do get a lot more realism because you get basically as much of the sample as possible, so you're not cutting anything away. Whereas if you turn it all the way up, it feels super tight to play, but you do lose a little bit of that attack. So before I go onto the rhythm page, I'm just going to show you some of the other mixes we have here. So let's load up the aggressive mix. So immediately you'll hear that there's quite a lot more going on in the processing chain in this mix to bring out that aggressive sound. There's quite a lot of compression and saturation baked into the mix. And then we can push this even further with the saturation and squash controls that I've already shown you. Let's just go completely crazy with the ensemble as well. And then moving on to the gritty mix. This is a slightly different processing chain that really brings out more of the mid-range and just gives it that gritty sound. I think this is my favorite mix overall, especially when you get the close mics in there. It just has that real oomph to it. And then if you bring up the ensemble as well. Compare that with the natural. Completely different. It's all from the same recordings though, it's just the processing chain just adds so much to it. Sounds like a completely different instrument, doesn't it? So the aggressive and gritty, they have similar qualities, but when you compare them side by side, they are completely different. So, and then the aggressive. And then moving on to the snappy mix here. As the name suggests, this is very short and snappy sounding hits. So even when we have the room mics turned up, it still has that short and snappy sound. And then the close mics on their own, they sound really cool. And then by default, the punch is turned up a little bit. They still sound really snappy without the punch, but you can exaggerate that even more with the punch and Decay Trim. And then let's just crank up everything. So yeah, loads of diversity here in these mixes. They really all sound completely different. And one of the exciting things with this library is because it's a sound that no one's used before, no one's sampled cardboard boxes, as far as I know. As far as I know, it hasn't been used as a percussion instrument in any big scale like this. So there isn't really a perceived sound that cardboard boxes should have because there's no prior references. Like if you were to record a taiko ensemble or a tom ensemble, you have that expectation of what a tom or a taiko should sound like. But you don't have that expectation with cardboard boxes. So it really gave me a lot of freedom when I was creating these mixes because they're not supposed to sound like cardboard boxes necessarily. They're just supposed to sound like cool percussion that happened to be made out of cardboard boxes. But I had tons of fun making these mixes. And talking of having tons of fun, let's go on to the design drums. So the design drums are completely new instruments that we've created using the source recordings from the library. And there's a big range of these design drums here, so I'll just play a few. So it's mapped in a kind of similar way. We've got the low hits down at the bottom of the range. Some of them sound really huge, like this chonk. This is a chonky hit, all right. Then we've got chungus up here. And this is all made from the cardboard box recordings, but we've completely transformed them. And by the way, these all have the round robins and velocity layers, so they're completely playable instruments, so you can just use them as a drum. I like the broken box one. It's got a bit crusher on the top velocity, but every round robin has a slightly different bit crush value, so the different aliasing comes in at different frequencies for each round robin. It's really, really fun. And we've got some higher drums here. So yeah, that's the design drum patch, and it's got all of the same features on the main page, so you can still sculpt them in the same way. Obviously, we don't have the mic mixer because they're all designed as a single mic sound, but we've got the sculpt controls here. So now let's have a look at the rhythm page. Now this is a rhythmic step sequencer that's really easy to use. So if we just go over here and turn the rhythm engine on and then press any key, so as you'll see, when you hold down a key, these little LEDs light up and that shows the current step. And then the height of these bars determine the velocity of that step. So you can really easily just drag your mouse across and control all of these together. So if you drag them all down, you won't hear anything. So let's put in a little rhythm. Don't know what this is going to sound like, but let's give it a go. And And then down here, we've got filter as well. So the top one's for velocity, the bottom one's for filter. So you can drag the top of the bars, and that's low pass filter. And if you drag the bottom, that's high pass filter. So when the bars are completely white, that's the filter's completely open. There's no filtering happening. That's pretty cool for velocity. So then if we want to bring in some low pass filter, you just click and drag the top. And then if we want to bring in the high pass filter, just do the same, but click the bottom. So yeah, really easy. You can also change the number of steps. And these are independent as well, so you can have more steps on the velocity than the filter or vice versa. And then here we've got a slider here, which is for dynamics. And what that means is it just scales the velocities down based on the position of this slider. And that's also controlled by the mod wheel. So you can ride the mod wheel while the sequence is playing and create dynamic swells. Now, another thing with the dynamics control, we've got two modes. So the standard mode is what you've just seen. So it's scaling the velocities up from 0% to 100%. We've also got another mode, which is called extended. And that basically means that when the slider is in the middle or the mod wheel is in the middle, that's 100%. And then you can go beyond that. So you can scale them up so they're at their full values. And you can also add more keys while the sequence is playing. And in the current mode, which is down here, the restart sequence mode, that'll basically mean that the new key you play will start from the first step. So if we try this, then you see there's two LEDs lighting up at a time, and that shows the current step of each of those drums that we're playing. And then if we set the new key mode to continue, that'll mean that when you play a new key, it'll continue at the current step that the previous key was at. So basically all of the keys that we play down, those drums are all synced up on the same step. So you can choose either of those modes. You can also change the rate of the sequence. So by default, it's 16th notes. You can change it to quarter notes. Eighth notes, triplets as well. And then this is all synced to your host tempo. So if I change the BPM up here, that's all going to follow your host tempo and stay in time. And then over here, we've got some humanize options. So we've got humanize velocity. In fact, I'm just going to try this on the Snappy mix because it might be a bit more clear what the humanize is doing on this mix. So here, every time it repeats that pattern, it's playing slightly different velocities. So it just keeps it fresh and adds that bit of variation. You can also humanize the timing. And that just adds a bit of timing variation to each step. So each step could be a little bit early or a little bit late. And this is also polyphonic. So if you play multiple keys, so you'll hear that each drum in that sequence is being randomized separately for each step. So it creates that sort of flamming sound, quite similar to the Ensemble looseness control I showed you earlier. So you can push it to the extreme if you want, or you can just dial it down to something a bit more sensible. So yeah, it's super easy to use, and that's it for the rhythm page, really. And by the way, this rhythm page is also available in the design drums patch. So now I want to show you the next section of the library, which is the one-shots. So these one-shots were designed by Karel Sota, who's an amazing Hollywood sound designer who works on trailers and films, and he's just a great mixer, great composer, producer, sound designer. And he basically took the source recordings from this library and created these amazing sound design one-shots. So if I load the booms and hits, so some of these one-shots were made by Carell, some of them were made by me, some of them were made by Ben Squires, but they were all made from 100% Box Factory samples. So it's quite incredible just how different they sound. So we've got the booms down here, and then further up, we've got the hits. So there's a really big range of sounds here. We've also got the regular Sculpt controls. We can push up the punch, and then the saturate, squash, and the decay trim for the one shots behaves a little bit differently from the other patches. The decay trim is basically the release control for these patches. So when you release the key, when it's all the way down, it'll just play out through the entire sample. If you turn it up, it'll completely cut out when you release the key. So these are the booms and hits. Let's try the whooshes and rises. So the whooshes are in the lower octave here. So you see, as part of the whooshes, we've also got these rolls. And these can be really useful. And then above this section, we've got the whoosh hits. Some of these sounds that Carell made are just incredible. Listen. And then up at the top of the range, we've got the risers. Really cool. And you'll have noticed we've got the waveform display here, and this shows the waveform of the sample you most recently played. But we've also got these editing controls, so you can change the start time and end time of the sample. So you just press the key that you want to control, and then you can just drag these about, and this just changes where in the sample it starts playing from. So you can make the riser a lot shorter, and you can also play with the fade in time as well using this control. And you can also play with the end time as well and the fade out. So if we want this riser to just cut out abruptly when it gets to the peak, we can do that. So you can customize these sounds quite a lot. Now, I know everyone has a different workflow when it comes to one-shot samples like this. So as well as including these sounds within a patch in Kontakt, we've also included a folder with all the WAV files. So you'll see here when you play a key, it actually shows you the name of the WAV file that it corresponds to. So you can just dig into the folder of WAVs and you can pull in that exact sample. And that's really useful, especially for the whooshes and rises, because you can just drag them into your DAW and align the peaks up with the bar line. So you've got the flexibility to use these samples in whatever way works best for you. So finally, I just want to quickly show you the split patches folder. So the main instruments patches that I showed you earlier, they have all of the articulations mapped across the keyboard. But we've also offered these split patches which have just certain instruments loaded. So you can have the low hits, the mid hits, high hits, brushes on different tracks, if that's the way you prefer to work. So if I just show you the low hits here, we've actually given you a few more articulation variants on these split patches. So you'll see there's more versions of each articulation that have slightly different settings loaded by default. So these are all custom mappings that you could make yourself if you wanted something slightly different. But these are just ones that we've given you to sort of just give you everything you need. And then mid hits, I'll go for the aggressive mix for these. And again, there's a few more articulation variants for the mid hits as well. Let's go for the high hits on gritty. So these have a few more variants again. We've got more clacky sounds that are made out of the small sticks. And then the brushes, let's go for the Snappy mix for the brushes. So those are the split patches, just for those people who want to have that more granular control over the processing on each section of the ensemble. So if you want to have different processing on the low hits versus the high hits, you can easily do that with these split patches. So that just about wraps it up for this video. I'm going to do another video that covers the setup page in a bit more detail to show you how you can modify the articulation mapping and create your custom articulation sets and all that stuff. So I really hope you've been able to see just how diverse and flexible this library can be with all the different mixes and the sound design options as well. If you have any questions about the library, please drop us a comment or send us an email or get in touch on social media, anything like that. Be sure to look at the product page. We've got loads more information about the sample library there. Listen to our demo tracks. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.